One of the original English colonies, Massachusetts became one of the first to rebel against Great Britain, contributing to the birth of a new nation, the United States of America. In this video, we'll discover how Massachusetts played an important role in the creation of American democracy. We'll examine the leading role Massachusetts took in the push against British rule, and take a look at how women, indigenous peoples, and free and enslaved Black people all played a role in the American Revolution. The area that we now know as Massachusetts was populated by different indigenous nations for many thousands of years. But the creation of the first permanent English settlements, the Plymouth Colony in 1620 and the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1628, changed the region forever. Having left England, the Puritans and Pilgrims came to establish settlements where they could practice their faith in peace and pursue their own commercial interests. Initially, these interests were dependent on maintaining good relations with their indigenous neighbors. Colonists developed larger settlements over time, with their advancement into the continental interior made possible through war with indigenous peoples, dispossessing them of their ancestral lands and exposing them to deadly diseases. Recognizing the potential to make money from their efforts, in 1629, King Charles I granted them a royal charter to create another new colony. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, as it came to be known, was initially given the autonomy to govern itself and set a strong precedent for local colonial rule in the Northeast. An administrative center was established in Boston with a bicameral legislature, where power was divided between two houses, mirroring our current system of governance. The laws it created fostered commercial growth, but also reflected the strict Puritan beliefs of its members. As more English settlers flooded into the colony, they began to challenge the predominant religious orthodoxy. Not all were strict adherents to Puritan beliefs. For the Crown, challenges like these were bad for business. In 1691, King William III and Queen Mary II issued a new charter, bringing Massachusetts more in line with other English colonies in North America. Under this new system in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, freedom of religion was extended to all Christians except Catholics, and voting privileges were expanded beyond Puritans alone, so that more landowners and taxpayers would be eligible to vote. Both of these changes weakened Puritan influence on government and society. But with a powerful royal governor in place, Britain was able to strengthen its control over Massachusetts, weakening colonial autonomy. In 1756, Britain and its indigenous allies went to war with France and its indigenous allies for control of the upper Ohio River Valley. But victory for the British in the 7 Years' War came at a significant cost. To raise funds, Parliament enacted the Sugar Act, imposing taxes and restrictions on sugar, molasses, and other products like coffee and wine that were shipped to the 13 colonies. This legislation had a detrimental effect on colonial businesses dependent on these products. But for many, the greater grievance arose from the colonists' lack of representation in Parliament. In Massachusetts, colonists resisted the act, and others like it in a variety of ways. People protested at town meetings, they petitioned, they smuggled goods illegally, and eventually, the rallying cry of no taxation without representation echoed far and wide. While the British would eventually repeal and replace the Sugar Act, in 1765, Parliament passed the Stamp Act, which continued taxation on goods like documents, playing cards, and newspapers. In response, the Assembly of Massachusetts urged collective resistance, leading to the Stamp Act Congress of 1765, where representatives from 9 colonies collaborated on a declaration of rights and grievances against Britain, where they asserted that they possessed the rights of Englishmen, and that they be granted representation in Parliament. Tensions escalated in the years that followed, including at the Boston Massacre in 1770, where British troops fatally shot 5 colonists and wounded others during a confrontation with unruly civilians. Meanwhile, the secretive Sons and Daughters of Liberty resisted British taxation through civil disobedience, including public protests and boycotts of British goods. Perhaps the most famous act of defiance came in 1773, when 342 chests of tea were tossed into Boston Harbor. Parliament's harsh reaction included the Coercive Acts, which imposed severe legal penalties on the colony of Massachusetts, including dissolving the Massachusetts Provincial Assembly, shutting down Boston's port, effectively ending commercial traffic, and allowing British soldiers to be provided accommodations in the colonies, eventually increasing the number of British troops present in the colonies. As calls for an end to British rule in the colonies grew louder, Massachusetts leaders like Samuel and John Adams served as delegates to the First Continental Congress, where 12 of the 13 colonies called for a boycott of British goods and called for the British government to change its colonial policies. Tensions finally boiled over when British troops attempted to seize a stash of weapons in Massachusetts, sparking deadly battles in the towns of Lexington and Concord. The first shots of the American Revolutionary War were fired on Massachusetts soil. During the War for Independence, women and minorities played an important role in supporting the cause. Women produced handmade supplies like blankets and uniforms, organized fundraisers and boycotts. Others served as cooks or nurses for the Continental Army, or acted as spies. Deborah Sampson, a woman from Massachusetts, notably disguised herself as a man to fight in the Continental Army. She served for over a year before her secret was discovered, and she was eventually awarded a military pension for her service. Mercy Otis Warren, another woman from Massachusetts, penned a series of plays that satirized some British officials. One included the Royal Governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson. Several thousand Black and Indigenous men contributed to the revolutionary cause, including at both the battles of Lexington and Concord, as well as at the Battle of Bunker Hill. Both free and enslaved Black men enlisted to support the rebels. Some enslaved men were sent to serve in the Continental Army as a substitute for their enslaver. Others served in the hope of being emancipated. Some used the money they earned as soldiers to pay for their freedom, while some, particularly in the southern colonies, escaped their enslavers to fight for the British in the hope that a British victory would hasten their emancipation. Some indigenous peoples in what we now call Massachusetts fought alongside the Continental Army against the British. Many, however, also fought with the British. In the aftermath of the war, regardless of which side they supported, indigenous peoples faced the difficult reality of contending with a new nation that threatened their ancestral homes and cultures. When the framers gathered in Philadelphia for the Constitutional Convention, the 1780 Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, with its system of checks and balances, provided an example for the new Constitution of the United States. Massachusetts would go on to become the 6th state in the country, the 3rd state to abolish slavery in 1783, and help lead the way toward a more perfect union.